All right, let's go ahead and get started. I can't believe somebody got me a gavel. I get the pound now. Anybody gets wild and unruly, be ready. We have all the members signed up and Mr. Antoon participating over the phone. So I will, okay, you're signed in, and everybody who is here and present on the phone or by proxy is signed in. Mina, you wanted to add approval of the agenda, and so I've got that on there. Our agenda is very simple tonight, and while the resolution creating us didn't make us a committee that would be subject to the Open Meetings Act, it did say that we should try and abide by those rules. So we do have to, in other words, we've got approval of the agenda on here. We can take things off, but we can't add anything. So that would be what we would be doing in this section right now. So if there's anything on the agenda that anybody does not want to discuss tonight, the three items we've got in the work plan are things that I think we had addressed taking up and really beginning preliminary discussions tonight and not taking any action. So,
Mr. Chairman, the IPRA compliance, Inspection of Public Records Act compliance, we had asked to have some research done in terms of the statutory authority vis-a-vis the Freedom of Information, FOIA, federal FOIA, because the New Mexico state law is based on the Inspection of Public Records Act is based on the Freedom of Information.
Actually, it's broader and more powerful, but I think Mr. Antoon was going to be looking at things and making a presentation on some of his ideas. This was his idea. So I think we'll wait till we get to that and have Doug give his presentation and his thoughts, and then probably have a brief discussion and see where we go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we are ready for public comment. We have one person signed up, Diane Goodman. And we don't have a time limit here at this committee, but generally try and keep concise and to the point.
Well, I'm going to be real short because probably my comment is a little late in the process, but I really would like to suggest that the mayor participate in the city council meetings. I expect that may be too late in that process, but it's, especially with an 8% voter turnout, people are becoming pretty apathetic, and I think having him there and knowing where he is on things and to see our government where they're working together, I think it would be more effective. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in and say that I think it would be beneficial to the citizens and to the city of Albuquerque if the mayor participated. I know that requires some amendments to the charter, and I've seen other governments do it, for example, Tucson and Austin, and it's a really great process. So,
in terms of participate, would you envision that the mayor would be a voting member of the city council, or?
I'm open to moving forward in any direction that we can to have him there. There's been several times where several councilors at those meetings have said that they wish that the mayor was there too. So I think there's a lot of people probably that would like to see his participation, and it would help us to know who he is and where he stands on things, and to see our government, our mayor and our city interacting with each other in a public way. So I would really like to see that as a, for your consideration. Like I said, I think it might be a little late in the process, I'm not sure, but I would like for you to consider that.
Actually, I think we're pretty open at this point. We're still setting the agenda. And I'm trying to remember, maybe Laura or Bruce, did the 2009, I think the 2009 Charter Review Commission looked at form of government and did a rather extensive review at that time. You might just briefly go over what, if you remember.
I remember that one of the top agenda items was to look at the form of government and to look at other cities like Tucson and I think Phoenix at the time that had the mayor sitting on the council as a voting member. And sometimes they were voting, sometimes the mayor voted, sometimes only in a tie. But that was looked at, and I think the committee back in, and this was several years ago, but the committee that was reviewing the charter at that time decided that they weren't, going to go that way. That each type of government had its own
strengths and weaknesses.
Strengths and weaknesses, yes. So, and I think everyone decided at that time there were too many other things to take on, and the actual form of government they weren't ready to do. But there's a lot of really good reasons to look at that.
A lot has changed from 2009. So I think, and although this is something that's more permanent than just what's happened in the last 6 years, I do think it's actually more democratic, and it's more open and transparent. We don't get to see the mayor. In fact, I've actually face-to-face mentioned that to Mayor Berry. I think he needs to come out, and whomever the mayor is, we need to know who they are. And I think it would be very helpful to the citizens to be able to see him and actively participate, whether it be voting or not voting, just to see and know him. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I might just mention to the committee, that certainly, if any of the committee members, want to bring up any topic, we just need to get it on the agenda for discussion. Generally, just a little bit of background, there are traditionally 3 forms of municipal government: the strong mayor form of government, which is like the federal or state government, which is what we have, where the legislative and the executive functions are separated, with the mayor having veto power is one form, the one we have. The weak mayor form of government is typically one where the mayor sits on the council and participates either in case of a tie or as a regular voting member. And the executive function is done by a town manager, county manager, or city manager, that sort of thing. And the other one is the commission manager form of government, where there actually is no mayor. This is affectionately because I come from that part of the country. The Galveston Plan, which was a reform plan in the early 20th century, and it's where there is just a legislative body who hires and fires an executive to run the government. So that's just kind of a quick background on kind of the typical types of municipal government that you find. And as I recall, because I was city attorney during that period, they looked at a number of things, and as Laura said, there were pros and cons for all 3 of them. I will say that typically the larger cities are typically a strong mayor form of government, but that's certainly not something we're tied into. Laura?
It made me think, though, as we were talking just now, that there might be something in between where we don't actually have to change the full form of government, but maybe we create some kind of formal way that, other than the CAO being at every meeting, because there is a requirement that the CAO attend for the mayor. But it seems that maybe there would be some other way we could institutionalize kind of what you're talking about. And maybe we should take a look at that and see if some other cities have some creative ways of doing that.
That'd be great.
Would that basically involve sort of forcing the mayor, as the CAO is forced to occasionally attend city council meetings? Is that the alternative? And does that,
like that.
And does that have sort of separation of power issues?
I think in a strong mayor form of government, it does present some issues like that. Chris, you had a comment?
I was just going to offer that the language that exists now says that the mayor shall, or the mayor's designee shall. And so it's already sort of there, and so it's always been the designee apparently. Right. So, I mean, as a technical matter, you can scratch over the designee if that's the way that task force wanted to look at it. But
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I've been in the city council, now I started to run for the Senate, New Mexico state government, and then the county commission, and this is one of those issues that you can change it, but if the players don't make a decision to work together, it doesn't matter what form you have.
Mhm.
You know, and that's what's going on with our communities now, is that people are just darn right mean about their way they're treating each other with their politics. And it's getting ugly where people are afraid to come out and really even give their true feelings about issues. Everybody's got to be so politically correct on everything because they'll just, I mean, times have changed. And I don't know that changing these rules is gonna help us, because you can't change human nature and personalities and those kinds of things. You know, all we can do is plead. You know, please be civil, you know, be nice, guys, you know? But
Maybe we could put that in the charter. Maybe
Let's
we
be
could
nice
put-
to each other.
Maybe we could put that in the Constitution.
Shall be nice.
The Congress shall play well together. Thank you. And Steve, my recollection is, and Laura again correct me, but I think that was one of the factors influencing the decision in 2009 not to recommend a change in form of government. Now I do remember, as a matter of practice, and actually it was even before your time, because I'm before your time, Steve.
I just see Marion Cottrell passed.
I did. I'm gonna go on Saturday.
Yeah.
So, but Harry in his first term, not his second term, but in his first term, used to, not all the time, but occasionally go sit on the dais with the councilors, and that's when this form of government first got off to its start. But he had been a commissioner in the commission manager form of government that we had before we moved to a strong mayor in '74. All right, well, I'm going to,
Did he sit at the smoking end or the non-smoking end?
he sat at the non-smoking end. That was a different world too. That's back when everybody was puffing away and you had smoking side of the council chambers and non-smoking side of the council
I
chambers.
remember that one.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I know. It was actually it was Marion, me, and Mel Aragon. We were on this when I was on. We were
Smoking?
Oh, and Sandy West. We were on the smoking side, and everybody else was on the. So it was a 5-4 minority.
Good.
All right. That's all our public comments. So let's go into the discussion of the work plan. The first item we've got on here is the discussion that we've had on how to deal with the redistricting, years. When we've got a very compressed schedule. And I don't know if anybody, you know, in our discussion at the last meeting, we had a number of ideas moving the city's elections to March, which would be consistent with all the other municipal elections throughout the state, moving the elections just on redistricting years to a later date, and then other alternatives were trying to compress the schedule for redistricting and deal with that in a more rapidly than typically we might have been able to before. I don't know if any members have had any thoughts on that, any discussions. Steve?
I just did some quick Googling before I came to this meeting to look at what other municipalities are doing in terms of, and it's pretty odd to have municipal elections in October in odd numbered years, as it turns out. I think of major cities in the United States, it's basically Albuquerque and 4 cities in North Carolina. Other than that, it's basically unheard of. And I think moving it to, you know, there's a lot of municipalities are doing it in November of odd numbered years, which might help a little. Moving it to March, you know, for this specific problem would help even more. And I think the issue that came up last time was that would mean candidates would have to be out there in the you know, in the middle of winter, going from door to door. And, yeah, there's a lot of cities. Well, first of all, Santa Fe, you know, which is typically 10 degrees cooler than we are, does it in March if they
Right.
can do it. I would think we could, but it's also cities like Chicago, Madison, Anchorage, Alaska even has its elections in April. So I think if those cities can do it, we can, and I think we should seriously consider that.
I think it's something that we should, you know, continue to consider and leave on our discussions. One of the things that is also a factor, and this this is, I think, a number of discussions have been coming along, both digitally and in the print media, with regard to our record turnout this last time around. Unfortunately, a record low turnout. About combining all local government elections. Now, this is something we couldn't do in the charter, but if we combine the school board, you know, a MAFCA, Conservancy District, and city elections into one election, you know, that might do something. Because right now, you know, the 8% turnout is basically candidates' extended families voting, and that's it. You know, so I think something needs to be done. So, you know, if
They decided.
there, you know, we're down a few members tonight, so I hate to have like really kind of substantive discussions, but we might for our next meeting.
Let me just talk a little bit about the different things you threw out.
Okay.
Yeah, APS, it's gonna work for combining an APS and a city election until you get to the South Valley and then the unincorporated parts of the North Valley, because they're not gonna go on the same day as city elections for that. So that would be a problem. Some of the other boards, the Conservancy, for instance, they have the weirdest election. Only people that own land
Right.
can vote, and then if you don't both have your name on the deed, only the person on the deed can vote. And they've got a whole thing that's historical in terms of the Native Americans in Sandia and Cochiti all the way to Sleta and past. You know, they've got all sorts of long-term agreements on, you know, on this whole thing. So that would be a hard nut to crack. You know, but I like the idea of combining APS and the city, because both of them have horrible voting records right now, and if there's anything we can help, I mean, not that we can help with our voting records, but if there's anything we can do to get the city and the schools working together and maybe voting, you know, because when you're out there running for office, you're meeting everybody else that's out running for office.
Right.
So that could be a good synergy for people to get to know each other.
Well, I think it's certainly something that we ought to. And what I'm going to suggest is that if anybody has any specific ideas, get them to me before the next, you know, the Monday before the next meeting. I think our next meeting is the 29th, is that correct? And then I'll put them down.
Send that to us, and they never did. The schedule of meetings?
Yeah, I think a lot of it
Lindsay got sick.
came about because
Oh, okay.
Lindsay's situation.
I'll be noting that though, that's not something I knew needed to happen, but we'll make that happen.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And I think it was every other Thursday, except we decided not to meet on Thanksgiving Day.
But there was Sunday though, and it might be the 29th, this room is not available. Or something.
29th is what we had scheduled, but is that not available now?
I don't know.
Well, we can find another room.
Yeah,
I mean, we can.
I just
well,
remember somebody saying something about that last week. Okay.
So I'm going to put down topics like change it to March for charter purposes. You know, change it to, we could actually even, I think in the charter, change it to the general election. So it coincides with the general election.
But you'll have such a large bond ballot that
Yeah.
will people
yeah,
spend the time to vote and go all the way through them, you know?
Yeah.
I'm just going to make it general then election day and other alternatives. And, you know, but just to keep in the back of our minds that election turnout is not a problem just with the municipalities. We had the lowest, in 2014, we had the lowest turnout in a statewide election, strike that, a national election, since 1942. Our state turnout was the lowest since, I think, somewhere in the 40s or 50s. The 2012 turnout was down. 2010 was down. It has generally been just on a downward trend for a number of years. So it's an issue that we'll get some more discussion on. Mr. Antoon, anything you want to chip in on this?
I like what you were saying, Bob, about possibly aligning it with the general election type thing. I know other municipalities appear to do it in the early spring or late winter, but I think that's begging for a continuation of what we've been doing, even though I think if you're going to increase voting population, the closer you get it to the most well-known election.
Right. And I think that's certainly something we can talk about, keeping in mind a very good point that Councilor Gallegos had brought up, that in that case you'd have city bond issue questions, charter questions, county bond issue, state bond issue. The ballot could just end up being, you know,
I know,
like War and Peace.
It would take a little educating, but if it were presented with, by the way, you know, these flood elections and school elections and these special elections that we've been punctuating throughout a calendar where we've got single-digit participation, guess what? They're gone away. We're going to have one. And you can focus your attention on one date and one clump of issues.
Yeah.
We just feel this would be the best, quote unquote. And then the other thing I thought was, I remember now, you could have someone running for school committee now, and then they don't win. But then they go for the flood control election. We just had something like that where a former state legislator, had lost re-election and then went, you know, for something else. It will affect the people involved in running, because people who might run for one thing and lose and then run for another thing during the next election and win will only be running for one thing in this one election. I don't know if that was communicated.
I understand. There's lots of complications, and
which is good, maybe. That might be good.
Yeah. Councilor Gallegos.
Could we invite the clerk's affiliate from the Association of Counties and maybe our own county clerk to kind of help us with some of these technical issues associated with elections and the length of a ballot and those kinds of things?
Yeah. Why don't we let me get with the county commissioner and see if we can get her on the 29th. And I know that she came and testified in our previous hearings, and she does like to be accommodated, but I think we could put her right at the first of the agenda just for her testimony and her questions. So I'll work with Chris and we'll reach out to Maggie and see if we can get her here.
Okay. Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Would it also be helpful to have the city clerk in attendance? Because that is another, spate of elections. Also, one other thing to consider, unless I'm looking at this wrong, this could be a money saver for the city.
Sure.
And by hundreds of thousands, I think, as far as personnel and all that other stuff.
Right. I think that we've already got an invitation extended. I need to follow up on that because I think she was planning on coming and testifying with regard to several issues that she's got and several things that came up in the election year this year, and I think she was going to be coming on the 29th. That's what we had talked about, I think, at the last meeting. So it might be good to try and get them both here for some discussion like that on some of these issues. So we will reach out to both of them and see if we can have something like that put right at the beginning for a discussion. All right. The next item on our agenda is just to continue the issue on open and ethical elections. We were going to be reaching out, I think, to see if we could kind of start fixing a list of things to do rather than going back and re-looking at all of them. Sean, I know Heather was going to be working on that, and I think she was going to looking more towards the 29th.
Yeah, you had put it on the docket
for that.
So.
But I just wanted to make sure that we were all continuing to think about and getting with our counselors, for those that haven't gotten with your counselors, or trying to sit down. I think I suggested to you and David to get with the CAO, and so if possible, it's not always possible. So I just wanted to. This is to keep this on our minds and keep moving along.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Could I request that you put those items on the memo you're sending to us on Monday, October 26th? Any issues that have come up, if we could have that list, the 26th, that would be helpful for the meeting on the 29th.
What I'd like to do, if I'm able at that point, is actually put them as sub-items on the agenda. In other words, we would have open and ethical election matters, and I would list them.
It would just help to review it prior to.
And so that will go out with the agenda on Tuesday.
That sounds wonderful.
Okay.
And this includes the disclosure.
This includes, yeah, yeah, and it wasn't. It is both items, the election code and the open and ethical election code. And I think I mentioned at the last meeting that I did have an opportunity to meet with the chairman of FGO. They have this set for their first meeting, and they have all the provisions that we've got, and he was very amenable to getting them put off. So I need to, I think the sponsors are Councilor Lewis, so I'll talk to Councilor Lewis and get it till after the first of the year.
Are we discussing this item at this meeting at all?
If you have anything that you want to get, any specific items that you think that we ought to be considering in terms of revising either the election code or the open and ethical election provision, yeah, let's bring them forward, because we want to make sure that we've got them. The other thing the reason I'm trying to get this list done is so if there's any research or work that needs to be done on them, that we can have the city attorney's office or council staff do that before we bring them up. So have you got some, Mr. Antoon?
Well, Mr. Chairman, this is looking like a really tough nut to crack. I personally favor local public financing of elections. But just like population of voters, active voters are going down to these elections, it looks like it's almost like a tale of two cities. You've got not everyone participating, and I think that is instantiating or actually institutionalizing almost like two different cultures politically in the city. And it's not necessarily partisan. I've had the opportunity of being involved or coordinating I think, 4 publicly financed campaigns. I'm even trying to remember if I've been involved in any private funded campaigns in Albuquerque, and I don't think I have. And I think the system works, but I don't know what to do, because this is what I'm bringing up right here, is a reflection of the same dichotomy that the federal is looking at out of Citizens United, because you have a desire to better maintain disclosure, or to have disclosure, while we come up against constitutional issues regarding the First Amendment and other aspects of the Constitution. And I would never be one to quote the current president, but I remember he said there are just some things that the way the founders wrote things just don't make it possible for me to get some of the things I want done. Now, of course, you know, he's taken a different tact regarding executive actions, but it's a matter of fact. There are certain things, I don't know if we're going to be able to crack this nut.
I know, and some of those things will be on the list that I will provide us, that we will be discussing. The disclosure requirements in the election code specifically, and the matching funds are 2 things I know will be on our list to discuss. I do believe we should have a threshold question of whether we even ought to try to fix, or can we fix what we've got now.
I think...
let me finish. Our election code is clearly unconstitutional and can't be enforced on disclosure. The matching funds provision that we've got in the open and ethical election is clearly unconstitutional and can't be used. And maybe... Go ahead, Mr. Antoon.
No, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Please finish. You made a very good point there by clarifying it right here, the way you are.
All right, and so I think what, you know, let's have some threshold discussions, and be prepared to kind of go through item by item some of the things that we're aware of that the counselors have concerns over, that are constitutional concerns, questions like you just raised, that have emerged recently, and especially the Journal. Is public financing even a fair thing for the city? And so we'll really kind of get into that, into the meat of that, and on the 29th.
Obviously, it's going to take some work. I personally don't think we should surrender to what appears inevitable. I think that the private interest nonprofits, for example, PERG and Common Cause particularly, they've put in a lot of work to try and present something workable. And I wonder if we're really serious about it, shouldn't be, and maybe we're this committee.
Well, I think what the plan is, what we talked about last time is that Common Cause would come and actually they are working on it, and Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Heather's working on a kind of a presentation that will take into account some of the concerns and criticisms of the counselors, some of the other issues, and address some of the things and so that will be a presentation that we'll have right after our clerk's discussion, I think, at our next meeting.
What concerns me about that is I actually think I'm one of the people working with Heather. We've sat for hours just recently trying to even get our handle around, you know, some of the things we missed and didn't necessarily catch in the last draft. And we were able to get a few things. But as far as the ultimate questions, we weren't able to hit it, and I think the answer is somewhere out there.
Well, and I think that's why we need a starting point, and hopefully that's why I said I put this on for another discussion at this meeting, because I really want us to have a good starting point on the 29th when we said that we would really start working on both of these codes. So unless there's some other discussion, Doug, do you have anything more?
I don't, sir. No, I'm not on this. Thank you.
Okay. My only observation on the whole question of money in elections is to quote the bard, my bard, Bob Dylan, money doesn't talk, it swears. So I think that certainly holds true in elections. All right, Doug, it's your show now. The IPRA compliance issue, local IPRA compliance issues.
This week's episode won't necessarily be a complete episode then, but I have had an extensive discussion with Susan Bowe. And one thing that, after nearly 45 minutes of the initial part of the meeting, was the discovery really that this is completely new ground. She could not think of one instance, not that we've left it at what's on the top of our head, but she could not think of one instance where municipal city enforcement mechanisms are in place. She is elevated, or I should say pushed this question onto the national group, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it right now, that deals with public records. To see if there is any proven course or even pilot project of taking a state statute, which all the states have them now, however, they are only state statutes, and seeing if they have, at a lower level, been any type of enhancement of those state statutes, because as you know, we can't narrow this, that it puts in place further enforcement of, not just encouraging, but requiring better compliance with open records. So that question is actually our question. Is being considered among a national committee that the open, that FOG serves on. And I hope to speak with Susan again soon. We've scheduled again to talk when she hears back. As far as anything beyond that, I really don't have of substance to share with you, except we're trying to find out if the wheel's been invented. And if it hasn't, we could be, as Susan and I, chatted about, a path maker on this. We could be precedential in coming up with teeth at the local level, where, by the way, a great deal of the non-disclosure, and I almost mean that as critically as I can say it, is being perpetrated, because it's, as we know, it's taking hundreds and hundreds of thousands, probably more, across the board for taxpayers to eventually pay to surface information that law enforcement, in particular, are retaining. For what reasons? We just saw it again this week. A June incident, the video was finally released, and it was, I think, disrespectfully cloaked with digitizing, where you couldn't even, you had trees that were digitized. And I realize we need to protect the safety and security of certain arboretum examples. But in our city, I think it would be, I don't know if it's like this everywhere, it probably is in a lot of places. I think it would be good to be the path maker in saying enough of this crap. Chief.
Okay.
Ms. Kraft, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we've got a couple of hands up here, so I'm going to go to Mina.
Thank you. Yes, Doug, I was just thinking, and members of the task force, Mr. Chairman, that really, in my mind, as I'm looking at this issue, and I have some experience with this, this is more of an issue of training and a remedy. And I think that the city attorney's office could get involved in this, in training the agencies in terms of public records officers who would be looking at the requests from the public, analyzing whether any of that information is public, and if there are exemptions, they have to state the exemptions. And the remedy is a state district court for state records. So there already is a remedy. I think that a lot of this has to do with potentially a lack of training for the public records officers, that really, you know, maybe some agencies are good about knowing what the law is and the records officers release the information in a timely manner, and other agencies don't really understand the importance or what the process is or what the exemptions are. So I think before we go to a local enforcement form, which is, you know, another bureaucratic form, we need to enforce what we have already, which is your remedy is in state court.
I'd like to respond.
Yeah, briefly, and then I'm gonna also suggest that we have a witness next time on this. But go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, Nina, I respect your experience extensively, and also your pure heart. As has been said, if men were angels, we probably wouldn't even be in need of a task force. We are so well beyond the failure of the statutes, and I hope if anyone else is on this commission can speak up. I can't see anyone, but we are so beyond the failure of what was in place. We now pay lip service to this law, and education is important. And quite frankly, I think the education is part of the problem, because though there is some encouragement and some training, there is, and I have been on the inside, there is purposeful obfuscation of the laws. There is purposeful and intentional denial of the underwriting premise of the law, which is err on the side of disclosure. It is now the norm to withhold and dare the requester to demonstrate why it should be released. And that's even if you can get a custodial agency to admit it even exists.
Right. I think we're very familiar with a lot of those discussions. I want to get to some of the other members here. Steve, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, having done my fair share of records requests with APD, I have to say I completely agree with Doug. I mean, I think training and education is important, but obfuscation is actually the word I would use when it comes to APD. I think there's active litigation around this now. I don't know if that's going to be enough. I don't know if doing something with the city charter is the right way to go, but I think it's worth exploring because I do think he's identified a very real problem.
One of the things I think I think there's issues with it and with compliance. One of the concerns I've got, having been involved in complying for 17 years, is the fact that to a large degree we're dealing with unfunded mandates. And I think we need to talk about the resources that need to be committed to records compliance. Now, I don't think sufficient resources are being committed. I don't think sufficient resources were committed when I was around as city attorney. It was, you try and deal with these issues as best you can. And there's some real problems. When you've got a request that includes 20,000 documents that have to be reviewed for things like, privilege or other things like that, you know, there really are, no matter how hard you're complying, and Laura is shaking her head because she had to do this all the time, you know, it takes a lot of time and resources. And I
agree.
And while there may be,
yeah,
while there may be some obfuscation going on, I think one of the things we can certainly look at is, you know, are there sufficient resources being committed to comply? Back to Doug, then to Laura.
The point about the compliance and the unfunded mandate and the cost of it, it is very valid. I think, however, we don't want to mistake the forest for the tree. We're usually requesting, I'm talking as the public or some entity is usually requesting the tree or a tree. They'll even name the bloody tree. They know where the roots go. And yet the forest is used as the excuse. There is a systemic problem. I believe there are some agencies within the city that have demonstrated an ability to work this out. And I think City Council is one of them. While Laura was head of the council services, I was the originator of some requests, as you might remember. The compliance was excellent. It was immediate. It was wholesome. It wasn't belittled. It wasn't hard. It just took a decision. And that's where we have to get to.
Laura.
I think, I remember when IPRA was enacted, and I think everyone thought that, you know, who worked on it, thought that it had the best teeth you could possibly have. I mean, first of all, it's a state act, so all the cities had to comply with it. And secondly, you know, there were monetary damages, and sometimes, you know, I mean, it's really different from any other statute that I can think of as far as compliance and, you know, what the remedy is if you don't comply. So I guess my question is, and I'm not sure even other states will be helpful in this regard, is I mean, if we're talking about it's the city that's the non-compliant party, what entity can go after the city other than the state? I guess I just don't understand, except maybe if there's authority given to what, the DA, although the DA has some authority already under some of these, yeah, so.
Yeah, you know, that's what Steve was saying. We don't know enough, but it is worthy of further study, and it isn't easy, another nut to crack. But I believe there is an answer there. And you know what is probably the litmus of it all? Money aside, which I believe is not prohibited if there's a commitment. Money aside, there should not be a public official that has a problem with what we are discussing. Because if there is, then we have a problem.
You know.
Yes. Well, the Inspection for Public Records Act, the plaintiff would be the entity that requested the public records, and the defendant would be the city of Albuquerque or whatever municipality is not producing the documents as required under the Inspection for Public Records Act. And the monetary damages would be awarded. You would sue in state district court. So that's the process that's there now. Now, whether or not people are using that process and using their legal remedies is another matter, but I don't think that requires us to completely enact some type of a, you know, enforcement entity at the local level when there is a remedy now in state statute. So
just one more time, Mr. Chairman, if I could, when Nina's done.
Sure. Go ahead.
I think the answer is in Nina's point. If people, that's just it, people, we're talking about a citizen, the parents of the woman who Officer Deere killed, not the lawyers, not a public interest group. It shouldn't be that way. It was meant not to be that way. But only those who can afford it can do it. And just because you can recover, a year and a half later is not easy on a people or a person. And it's not working. And it can. If it can't in a free society, we don't have what we like to brainwash ourselves into thinking we have. And I come at this from a purely conservative perspective, constitutionally.
I just wanted to say that you can file pro se. So an individual can file in the court pro se, fill out forms, say that your request, produce your initial request, and the judge will decide in camera, have an in-camera review of the documents that are produced by the particular agency, the entity where the public documents were requested, and make a decision. I mean, that's the process right now.
Have you done one meal or a couple? Because that what you just described is months.
Well, that's the process that's in. That's the process that's in the law.
Right.
Currently.
We're going to go down to Chris. Chris had a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer, to the extent it's helpful in the discussion, IPRA authorizes the collection of attorney's fees from the successful party's attorney. So, I think that's an important point in your discussion to be aware of.
And I think there have been a number, both against the city and the county and other cities and counties around the state, substantial attorney's fees awards that have
2 years later. 2 years later, after the issue, and more damage.
And I understand that, and I'm going to go to Steve, and then I'm going to kind of give a little wrap up for tonight. Steve,
Go ahead.
I just, I think compliance with IPRA is a difficult thing. I've probably spoken at 100 continuing legal educations on IPRA over the years. And it's going to be, there are many difficulties with enforcement and compliance, both, of IPRA. But I think what I'm asking, maybe Doug, you and Sue, I'm glad you've been working together, is if there is something specific that the city can do for itself that should be in the charter, that if you could have some sort of proposal, conceptual proposal on how that would work.
Bob,
Yeah,
let me just say that
that's a tough one, but we're working at it. It may very well be by ordinance, and we even talked about, and this is a way to sort of deputize every public servant at every level, that there could be work into the personnel processes, the human resources processes of the hiring and retention of employees, of certain enforcement and consequences of doing, withholding something that should not be withheld if it can be held, if it can be shown that it was indeed withheld for a reason not countenanced in the law that took 2 years to prove. I feel pretty strong about it, obviously.
I understand.
I appreciate you giving me the time.
And we'll have a more thorough, a continuing discussion on it. But Commissioner Gallegos, you had some further observations?
Yeah, I would hope that, when I listen to this discussion, it seems like, my God, even the attorneys are having a hard time with this thing. And I'm wondering, what about the average person? Because, most of the groups are making these requests, I would think, are professional groups, attorneys, special interest groups, the Albuquerque Journal.
Right.
And what about I have a friend that he got, police went into his house and they ransacked his house twice looking for his son, for his son's drugs. They didn't find a thing. They didn't leave a warrant at the house. It's been in the alibi, it's been all over.
Right.
The police department won't do a darn thing for him. Twice they've gone to his house with no warrant.
One of the things that we talked about last
time. They trash their house out.
Yeah, they do, believe me, I've seen some. Commissioner, one of the things we talked about at last meeting, you might remember, is it wouldn't be a charter thing, but we would have perhaps a city position for kind of ombudsman for the public in making records requests.
Yes.
That would help.
Think about that.
That would help, you know, people that perhaps are unfamiliar with how to do it, where to go. I mean, one of the real problems with records requests is sometimes a person will make a records request for a police record, and it ends up at, you know, the police at the airport, you know. So, yeah. You know, there are some things, but that's one concept that might help in situations like that if we did have an ombudsman.
I have to say that the foundation
about that. She was very pleased to hear that that was suggested. She had not heard of a public records ombudsman before. I'd like it to be certainly a service, if you will, or at least an area of assistance, but just one part of it. I could see the ombudsman, or perhaps another sub-IG that then takes the helping the individual, but also involved in the decision-making of what is going to be disclosed.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order.
Yeah.
Who is Sue Bowe? We keep having reference to Sue.
At the last meeting, we had I had suggested to Mr. Antoon that he get together with her. She is the executive director of the Foundation for Open Government, FOGS.
And how do you spell her name?
I think it's
B-O-W, I have her card, one moment. I think it's B-O-W.
No, B-O-E, I think.
I think it's B-O-E.
I think.
Who funds that?
Thank you.
Who funds FOGS?
Donors.
Donors. Many people think much of their funding comes through the influence of Kent Walls, but they have lots of people who make them. They have a big fundraiser. And Mr. Allen, it's your turn.
To some extent, FOG kind of fills that role, right? I mean, that's sort of what they do. They help people put together public records requests and tell you where to send them. I think there's part of that function that isn't covered by them, but it helps a little bit. Charles is shaking his head. I've used their services before, but Charles, I guess, has a different experience. But that is at least theoretically what they're supposed to do.
Well, we will.
I'll follow up.
This is certainly an item that's on our agenda. I think it's something that needs to be continued to be discussed, and if we can try to focus on not all the problems with IPRA, because by all means they are legion, again, on the compliance and enforcement end. But what can a city charter provision, what would a city charter provision look like that would address this?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a point of clarification that my comments here in no way express that I am against people getting access to public records. I'm certainly not a proponent of that. I'm a proponent of transparency and being able the public to access all of the documents, because the documents are there and paid for by the taxpayers, because taxpayers have paid these individuals' salaries, their office space, they're providing for the general welfare, and this information needs to be released, but it needs to be released, and there needs to be proper due diligence and proper respect for people's privacy, so that you have documents that are properly redacted, so that you have to protect an individual's privacy, and you also have to have transparency, and that's the balance.
I understand.
Thank
and
you.
I think it's the sort of thing, again, I just remind us, all of us, and especially you, Doug and Sue, let's do something that we can do something about, this commission can do something about, in terms of making a recommendation, either for a charter recommendation or for just a general recommendation on policies and procedures. There would not be a charter provision.
I understand, sir, and that's what it's good to be reminded of that, because it's possible to get a little misdirected. But I would like to also say in response to what Nina just said, I think there's no one alive who could, in fact, all of us in all of our recorded meetings could point to a more proper individual and professional attorney than Nina. She wants to do things right, and I understand that completely. And that's why my question, if you wanted to listen to it sometime,
Okay.
specifically assumed it was because of we wanted to keep things right that I responded the way I did. So I hope that that's understood.
And I appreciate the level of conversation that we've had here. It's all been at the very highest level, and the way political discussions as we try and formulate policies and recommendations, although we don't formulate policy. I certainly, but just to remember what our task is. I, for example, would love to have something in the charter that would force the Congress of the United States to pick a speaker. Something as simple as picking a speaker.
Steve Allen could work on that.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
But we are very limited in what we can do and the problems that we can solve in terms of the city charter of Albuquerque. All right.
Maybe Steve shouldn't work on that one.
Right.
Thanks for assigning me all these things.
No, but I think one of the things that I'm very proud of this commission is that we are able to have discussions like this where there are a variety of points of view and have them civil and focused on trying to make good and wise decisions for the city council.
I move we censure Chairman White.
I second. How about a motion to remove?
No way!
Maybe doing you a favor.
I know, that's why I'm asking. I'm suggesting let's do that. All right, we're going to move to section 5, which is other business. Anything else we want to talk about? I'm just going to kind of go over what we're going to do next time. We're going to talk about form of government and whether we want to continue that discussion. We are going to develop a consensus on election year issues, and hopefully if we can come around with some sort of idea to have council staff and the city attorney's staff start drafting something for us to look at. That we will have a presentation by the city clerk, hopefully, on items relating to the recent election, and I have added to that, I will ask that the city clerk and the city attorney's office do some practical problems in enforcement of IPRA. So we just at least have that perspective. The county clerk will come in and if we can arrange for this and have her talk about some of the things that we're going to be talking about in terms of the election. And then we are going to set the threshold questions for what will probably be the remainder of our term in terms of what specific issues in the open and ethical elections provision of the charter and the election code of the charter we want to talk about. Anything else?
I think David Buckles was going to talk to the city attorney again and think about whether to go forward with any other.
I'm not going to put that on. Okay. Because David's out, and let him have. We'll put that on for our. We're probably just going to have one meeting in November.
Okay.
It sounds like he was winding down on that issue.
Okay.
Well, I'm really concerned about the vote. The voting and what's happening with the lack of voting. And I don't know if this is our role, but I was thinking about maybe if the School of Public Administration could get a graduate class or something, do some focus groups and surveys and come out with a report they could give the city council so that people would at least have that issue on their agenda. That this is embarrassing, you know, it's embarrassing. And I don't know how we turn that around. I know a lot of people are just tired of being sick and tired right now.
Well,
But we need to keep it out in the public eye. You know, keep this issue out in the public eye, because what's going to happen, the next election is going to happen. Nobody's going to have thought
Right.
about it, except for those groups that make a little bit of money by getting $1 a petition or
right,
or what else are they doing? Well, they make their money, you know.
right. Well, and Counselor, I think, in my view, a lot of it goes back to what you mentioned at the very beginning of this meeting. People just feel frustrated about government in general. One of the things that's an encouraging sign for me, believe it or not, it is encouraging for me, the success of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And I think there's some similarities between both of them in their own way. But I think both of those people are offering voices that maybe will change that sense of frustration, you know, that exists now. That I think is reflective in voter turnout.
Those are national issues, and I know that people are angry with what's going on nationally, but here in our community, I feel like we're getting our spirit back, but this economy has just killed us, you know? And I kind of feel that the spirit of the community is coming back. I live in the South Valley, and every time I start seeing construction trucks and cement trucks coming on, I say, oh boy, we're coming back, you know? But I think even as few people have voted, the voice on the botanical gardens, where people said, yeah, we care about our community enough, I mean, that was a strong message.
Yeah.
I mean, because nobody wants to raise their taxes. I mean, our economy's in the dumps, you know? But the people made a strong, I mean, people are trying to come back as a community, you know? And with or without our mayor and our city council, I think we're gonna do it.
I think that the only reason I pointed out that enthusiasm is because I think the problem with voter participation is a national, a state, and a local problem. I think it's all over. Like our state election last year, lowest turnout, or the national election last year, and our state election last year, the lowest since the 40s. You know, so it's just something where, you know, hopefully people will get stirred up and reinterested. And community-based activism, I think, is a big part of that.
I don't feel that anymore. You know?
Hey,
I feel it, man.
Yeah, you know, one of the good things is, you know, I was in an election or in a district that had a counselor up, and you know, there was, you know, it was nice to have the candidates come by and say hello. I did learn, the most important lesson I learned in terms of being a good voter is if you vote early, like the day after or the day early voting starts, the candidates get that list, and all of a sudden you're off their list. They don't care about you anymore. So I was getting a lot of literature before early voting happened, and after early voting, I would only get the piece that somebody who paid for all the registered vote.
What percentage of the vote was early? Remember?
You know, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Interesting.
And I think it was. Steve, do you know what the turnout was in 6?
I don't.
It was. I know it was over 8.
Yeah.
It was 11.
11?
11,
Okay.
I believe.
Yeah.
It was 11 or 13. I forget.
All right, somewhere in there. Thanks, Sean. All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We will see everybody on the 29th.